Hi there, it is Karima Bibi from Keeper's Nursery and I'm making a video about espaliers. Today is the 2nd of July 2024. It is a little bit chilly, iffy. I don't think it will rain, but we will go ahead with this video. So, espaliers, what are they and why are they becoming more and more popular and how can you train them? That's the basics of this video. The training and maintenance is extremely important with espaliers, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. In the nursery, I used to train up to about 1,000 of them a year to sell. So I used to do lots of two-tier espaliers, and then I'd do other sort of training trees like candelabras and fan trains and stepovers. I'm not doing those anymore in the nursery. I'm doing one-tier espaliers and one-year-old fans instead. That's just because I've had to downsize. I'm a very busy person. I've got 4 children, and it is a tough job running a nursery on your own. Anyway, I can pass on some of this knowledge onto you. The idea being that if you buy a one-tier espalier, you can easily train it into a 2 or a 3 or a 4-tier espalier in no time at all. Even if you were to have gone out and bought a 2-tier espalier and spent a lot of money on it, you still have to maintain it, and it's quite crucial that you learn how to maintain an espalier because it can sort of fall out of function quite quickly, and I'll show you why, because it is quite an unnatural shape for a tree. Traditionally, trees were grown as sort of freestanding trees, so if you just plant a tree in the ground, the tree just wants to grow upwards, doesn't it? And then if you cut the leader off, then you get branches, and all those branches want to go upwards. With an espalier, it's very different. I'll show you an example behind me. So, here on this wall here, I planted several espaliers. It is a bit messy, I do apologise. I probably should have pruned these before, but being July, I haven't actually had a chance to prune off the new growth. Weeding I could have done, but I haven't done. So espaliers, this isn't a very natural looking thing, but it's quite a fun looking thing to see. So these are about, let's say, 10 years old now. This is a north facing wall, and as you can see, you have, I'll use my finger as a nice pointer. You have a main leader going upwards. These are all on MM106, so the wall is a few meters high actually. And then every 50 centimeters, I've trained a tier. Now the way you do this is quite simply cut the leader off at certain heights where the wires are. You can't actually see the wires, but this is what the blue ties are actually tying the branches to a wire, and I'll get to the importance of that later. But basically you cut the leader off and you need 3 branches, 1, 2, 3, and you do that again the next year, and you do that again the next year. That's the simplified version of this, and the idea being that you create a very sort of when these are all pruned, they do look very nice together actually. You get a sort of an interesting shape for a tree, and although the productivity is not particularly high on these trees compared to, let's say, a 10-year-old freestanding tree which would have more fruit on, it is a very formal appearance. It's also something that, let's say you have a wall and you want to plant a tree on a wall, this is what you can do, as opposed to a freestanding tree which has a much larger footprint. So now, how do you actually come about training one of these? I'm just going to go into the nursery in a sec and show you exactly how to train them, but more importantly, you have to think of maintenance, and I'll get to that as well, I promise. So here I am inside the nursery, and this is an example of how to train an espalier. So to begin with, most maiden trees will look a bit like this, where again, apologies, I haven't done the weeding yet, but these are maidens, and a maiden is an untrained tree where, as you can see, there aren't a great deal of branches. This tree won't naturally turn into an espalier. There are some lower branches, but most of the strength of the tree has gone into the leader, and that's quite right. The tree is trying to grow as tall as it can to dominate the sort of surroundings so that it can become established as a tall, healthy tree and receive as much sunlight as it can on its leaves. Now with these trees here, what I've done quite simply around this framework that I've created out of bamboo, quite simply, I've cut the leader off, as you can see here where the damage has been done, and the result of this is at 50 centimeters we now have every single leaf node turning into a short branch. Now, this is exactly what you would do if you were trying to create a sort of freestanding, let's say half standard or standard tree, where instead of just having one tall branch, one tall leader going up and nothing around it, you actually want to have lots and lots of branches. And they all come out at different angles, which is quite handy. Sort of at the top, most of the branches go upwards, and then lower down, instead of these just pointing upwards and bashing into these ones, the tree naturally produces sort of a larger angle. Now, you're not going to need all of these branches, as I said before. You just need 3. You need a new leader, and you need a left and a right lateral. Now, laterals are what we call these horizontal branches, and what we call the actual sort of set of those is a tier. So in the first tier, which I'm producing this year, I will choose some of these branches some of these short branches to become the laterals. Now, it's quite important, a few things here. This is quite a nice variety. If you pick a good variety of apple to do it with, you end up with more branches. There are some varieties around here, which I can show you right now, where you get less options. So this tree here is going to be a bit trickier, where there are only 3. It's a slightly bit behind, but there are only 3 options here for the laterals. Sorry if the camera won't quite focus in there, but there's 1, 2, 3, so that's obviously going to be the leader, and then there are luckily 2 others. But with this variety, and I'd suggest things in the Cox family or Laxton Superb or Tideman's Late Orange, those produce the most branches quite readily. Falstaff as well is quite easy to use. So down here we can choose which ones we're going to use as the laterals. So obviously that's going to be the leader at the top. Now all you want to do obviously is bend these in to produce that's what logic would say. Bend these in and you end up with a lovely set of horizontal laterals, and just basically cut the lower ones off. Now this is slightly incorrect, because the problem is, as soon as you bend in a branch to become your sort of lateral branch, the problem is you're actually going to decrease the growth of that branch. The tree naturally wants to grow upwards. This is going to be where all the energy goes. The tree's realized, hey, this is going upwards. It knows which way the sun is. This is going to get all the energy. The more you bend this at this sort of weak stage, the more the tree is actually going to give up on this branch and think, well, this branch is useless now because it's going sort of outwards, and all you'll get is a very wimpy little twig coming out this way and all the growth going upwards. So to combat that, what you actually want to do is pick a branch that's slightly lower down. Now you might think, oh, there's going to be a huge bend and a gap if I do this. Now the thing is, as this tree gets bigger, you're not going to be able to tell that much, that the gap will look less and less significant, and also it is the sort of natural kink. I'll show you again on the larger espaliers that I've done, but it's a nice little natural kink. These aren't, if you imagine like a maple tree where you get the sort of you get branches at the exact same height, and you sort of get that crisscross shape where it's like 2 this way, 2 that way, 2 this way, 2 that way. This isn't true with apples. Apples, you get sort of nodes coming out in a sort of spiral shape, and they are spaced differently. Now, one thing you can do to make sure that you're not picking branches too far down is if you were to cut the leader off at a and I'll show you this on one of these trees here. If you were to cut the leader off as soon as it reaches the right height, you actually get nodes that are very, very close to each other. Excuse the camera work. And what I mean by this is, within my hand here, at the top of the tree, we can see I think at least 4 or 5 nodes. There's a few at the top, but let's say there are 4 nodes, which means that if you cut the leader off there, within my hand you would have 4 or 5 options. Now if we go way further down the tree, I can't quite do that there, but I'll go back to these espaliers and show you what I mean. If we were to go way further down the tree, in my hand you've only got 2 sets of nodes to choose from. Now that's the same with all apples. So basically, if you were to come to train a new tier on your espalier, and you allow the tree to, you allow the leader to grow sort of 2-3 feet above where you want to make the cut, and you make the cut, you are really limiting yourself to sort of 1 or 2 branches in the right sort of height. And that's sort of forcing your hand. And the reason I'm saying that could be an issue is because anything could happen to these branches. You could bend them in and snap them. You could also sort of just get some random damage to them, pest, disease, all that. So what I tend to do anyway is have security branches as well. So what I would do here is tie in this one. I would probably tie in this one as well. Is this the same tree I used before? I'm not quite sure actually. I think I was possibly using the other one, but tying in several branches, and I'll show you what this means. So here is one where 3 branches look about right. I probably did this a few days ago. I've decided that that's going to be fine, and what I mean by not tying them in too hard is this branch is now coming out at a nice angle. This branch needed a bit more forcing, but I've still allowed it a bit of angle. If I now anchored this right down, the tree would stop growing this branch, almost giving up on this. This one would continue to grow quite happily, and the leader is going to grow. And the idea is later on in the year, you come and tie these back again, and you then end up with very healthy, established laterals. And the thing is that you need to establish a tier before you go on to the next tier. If you don't establish this tier, the problem is that the next tier will take over. The tree will do all it can to forget about lower branches and to grow higher up. You've got to basically mean that the tree has invested so much on these lower branches that they're all the way out here. They're about sort of 50-60 centimeters out at the end of the first year or second year. They're just established branches that the tree's not going to give up on. Inevitably, the tree will put on more growth at the top each year than it will at the bottom. So it's quite important that you keep the bottom branches quite happy and going on at a sort of strong level. So here is an example of what I mean by having a few branches as a sort of insurance. This is a Laxton Superb. Lovely amount of branching already. It sort of naturally branches quite easily, and I would recommend, if people want to sort of an easy variety to train as an espalier, they go with something like this. Even if you bought a maiden, it would probably have loads of branches on. So up here we've got sort of almost like 2 ideal branches. Because they're already quite long, it's all right to tie them in. The tips are starting to bend upwards. This is only a few days after having tied them in. That means that the tip will continue to grow because it's not actually being forced down too much. But lower down we've also got 2 branches. Now the node distance is quite large here, but what you would do is either use this pairing or this pairing, and because they're sort of relatively matched up, you're never going to really be that bothered by the gap between where the branch angle comes out and where the 50 centimeters actually is. Now the thing is, the angle, this is actually a much weaker branch than this one down here, because of the angle of this one coming upwards. It's quite a strong branch, and as the lateral extends and gets heavier and heavier, it's going to put more force on this joint. This joint has to be strong enough. Now this joint, where it's more horizontal, is actually a weaker joint, and it could snap at some stage. So that's why it's very important to always tie in your branches. And when later on, when you come to actually plant one of these out, you have to really put in quite a strong sort of structure. Bamboo canes may not be strong enough. You may need to invest in wires. Now those could be staked, or you could use, if it's on a wall, you're going to use vine eyes to basically ensure that the tree's not going to fall apart, because it would be a huge shame if you start losing laterals, because then going back to forcing new laterals and trying to do that with notching, even if you can get a bud to sort of grow again using something like notching, the tree is rarely going to bother to invest much in a lower tier if it's already sort of 3 or 4 tiers up there. What you'd actually probably have to do is cut the tree back quite a lot, or in fact sometimes just forget about a lower tier. Maybe extend the lower tier of a sort of adjacent tree if you've got something like that to cover up that mess. So here is an example of what actually can go wrong. Now, I pruned some of these lower branches off a few weeks ago, and then about a week or so ago I came round to actually tying these all in. Now, as you can see here, one of them has snapped, and that's why I used the insurance policy, because basically this angle was too much for it to tie in. I probably knew that anyway, because that is bang on the 50 centimeters. It's already relatively thick because these are quite sort of big branches, being something like Laxton Superb. So that wouldn't bend, so that snaps. So later on I'll come and cut this off, and we'll just use this lower branch, and it is in a perfect position anyway. It's just useful to do an insurance policy. Now, this is something you should do, and I'm coming on to what you should do when you plant a new plant a 1-tier espalier or a 2-tier espalier, and your initial training that you have to do. Now, you could treat this could be your 1st tier, or this could be your 2nd tier. So let's start off by saying that this is a new espalier that you've a 1-tier espalier that you've bought. Imagine this isn't here. Actually, I'll go to the adjacent tree to show you exactly what to do. So you've bought an espalier, plant it in the ground, make you're going to have to install a nice framework. What you then want to do, your next protocols are, do you want to train a new leader? Yes, probably, because you don't, do you want to train a new tier up on the leader? Yes, you probably do, because let's say you want to create a 2nd or 3rd tier. And what do you do with the tier that's already in? Obviously tie in the laterals. The next thing you want to do is cut the tips off the laterals. So what you would do is just cut off about 1/3 of these. So let's say if this was actually one that you bought, this being early July, this isn't as long as they should be, but let's hope that this is at least sort of 50 centimeters or so outwards. You don't want to go mad, these aren't going to be a meter out. Let's say you cut sort of 20 centimeters or 15 centimeters off. You'd probably cut to a downward facing bud if you can, but it doesn't really matter actually, would it? No, not really. You could do a sideways facing bud. Basically, the reason that you want to cut the bud is if you just left this alone, the tip would continue to grow, and although some of these secondary branches may grow, this may soon turn just into bare wood. Especially after you've planted a tree, it's not going to establish straight away, and you will get less growth. You won't get another, let's say, 50 centimeters of growth the 2nd year on a lateral. I mean, the problem is when the roots aren't established, you don't get as much growth. These roots have already been in the ground for a year, they're established. This tree is sort of growing at its maximum rate. When you plant a tree, it spends a lot of time re-establishing, and then maybe in the 2nd year you're going to get loads of growth. But if this all turns into bare wood, the problem is that means it will not fruit on this wood. And although the tip will grow, you'll just end up with a bare patch here. Now, I would recommend that the vertical, the main leader becomes effectively bare wood, apart from this productive top area where you actually want to train a new tier. Possibly also in the crook, I would also have that as bare wood, so that it visibly you can see the pretty sort of where the sort of plus section is, as it were, the cross. You want to be able to see the joint. You want to see the hard work. You want to show off the fact that you've trained this espalier. It's not just happened on its own. So you can see basically where it's been done. But over here, you actually want laterals. So it's not just going to be an outward stick, and I'll show you again on the more mature tree, but you actually want to have up and down sort of spurs. Now, spur formation is quite simple to do. Once this starts to grow outwards, you cut it back to a third downward facing bud at the end of the season, outward facing bud as it were, sorry. And eventually over time you get sort of a knobbly little amount of growth, which isn't, you know, structurally going to do anything, but it's just a short bit of fruiting wood. So you want basically around these to have short bits of fruiting wood. Now, the thing about this means that if you were to train your own espalier, and I've done 50 centimeters, but some places may do 30 or 40, the closer the tiers are to each other, it does look very sort of, it has a different appearance if you have nice sort of close together tiers, because I guess it creates a different sort of overall sort of well, it's a neatness to these are formally trained trees, so if you can have lots and lots of narrow tiers, it is going to look like a neater tree. However, the problem is, in reality, you need spurs to come off these so that you actually get fruit. And once these start crisscrossing together, and you can't see, actually this cane helps, but if those start to cross over each other, you no longer can see the definition of the fact that there are tiers, and that's not going to look as good. So I do 50 centimeters, you probably get away with 40, but once you get down to 30, it's not going to look as good. But the idea is that that's the first thing you want to do. Just cut these off, and you would train a new leader to come out so you can elongate the tier, but also you're getting a few branches here, and anything growing vertically will be much stronger than anything going downwards. But because you're not really going to do much with them, that's not too big a deal here. With fans, it's a much bigger problem, but with an espalier, you're going to cut everything back anyway. Now, what you want to do with the leader is exactly what I did down here, which I showed you slightly earlier in the video. Is just once you've got your framework in place, you cut the tip off. You want to do it sort of as soon as you can, really, so that the nodes are closer to each other. If you left it, like I said, you'd have a much bigger gap between nodes, and you may find yourself struggling, especially in that second year after you've planted the tree, because the problem is branching isn't going to be as big a thing with the tree. They're generally just not going to put on as much wood, which means that if you do have a branch that's not growing as well, and let's say the one below does much better, you may find yourself with large gaps, which isn't going to look as good. Okay, so now we're on to something like fan training. So you can see behind me the framework's different on a fan trained tree. You want to have, let's say, around a 45-degree angle for each of the branches, and it's the same process again. You cut the leader off, so you can see where the sort of spotty wood ends. That is where the older wood is, and all of these new branches are about the same age. As you can see, they're about sort of I guess around a month old or so, and it's nice, supple, flexible wood. And you just want to choose two of these, one to go left and one to go right. Now, fan training is much easier initially, as I say, because you don't need a third branch. So some varieties won't some varieties won't actually produce as many branches. This one does. I can't see what the label is on this, but it's not the branchiest variety, but it's fine. You've got about sort of 5 or 6 to choose from, and quite simply, the leader ones may be a bit stiff now, so I might not use those when I eventually come to tie these in, but it's quite simple. And here's an example of one that has been done. So here you can see the spotty wood, and you've got a left and a right, and already after those have been tied in, the branches are still trying to grow vertically as opposed to sticking to the angle, because the tree naturally wants to just grow upwards. And it's much easier than an espalier, because you're not forcing such a tight angle, you're not really forcing it all the way down. To get that sort of Y shape is extremely easy to do. This is something I imagine anyone could do. If they bought a maiden or something, just cut the leader off, you could easily train a fan trained tree. Now, the initial Y shape is easy. What you do after that is trickier. So let's say that you have bought a fan trained tree. Imagine these laterals are, imagine the sort of the arms are much further apart at this stage. They're out here. They're sort of close to 1 meter long. Similarly, you cut the leaders, you cut the tips off these. So cutting the tips off, basically, you should know by now, having watched a bit of this video, that's going to promote branching, because if you just have bare wood, if you just want, I mean, fair enough, if you just want a complete Y-shape tree, you can have that. The problem is, I suppose that's what a Belgian fence really uses, but you won't get much fruit off that. And also, generally where people have a fan train tree, they actually want to have sort of what we call a sort of a 5-finger fan tree, where off the fan you have upwards. So imagine those canes behind, you have branches going up and down, so it sort of splays out, so it covers a wall. Now, doing that is quite simple. Where each of these leaf nodes is, you can get another branch. You wouldn't actually want every single one of these branches to grow outwards, because some of them are growing in a different, you want the sort of the flat plane, you don't want the plane, if you imagine it's a 3-dimensional thing. Some of these are going to come into the camera, some of these are going to go away from the camera, so you can cut most of those off. And you would actually need to put some sort of structure to train the rest of those branches, because you may not want them to go straight up, you may want them to splay outwards. There's different ways. You can have a very formal fan where you have sort of extremely sort of strict lines where you want to sort of create a sort of perfect fan, like it would look like a comb. Or you could just have an informal one where basically as these grow upwards, you start to bend them outwards. Now, the reason you would do that is because vertical growth is going to be much stronger than this sort of horizontal downward growth. Horizontal downward growth, the tree knows is going to be weak, and it's not, the tree doesn't know it's going to be weak, it's just the tree knows it's not as valuable, and these lower ones will grow outwards a little bit and start wanting to curl up. If you want to keep them to go downwards, they're just going to be much weaker. You may only get about a quarter or a third of the growth on these, as you do with these vertical ones, which will actually become stronger than the main sort of 45-degree angle, because the tree knows it's going upwards. So when I was training 2-year-old fans, you would constantly get these massive sort of thumb thickness vertical secondary branches coming out, which you basically have to just cut them back, because there will every season be more and more of an issue where they just get stronger and stronger. But they're also very useful branches, so you have to sort of factor in the fact that they're going to grow upwards quite a lot. And let's say, take a step back, you have to be able to fill the space. Let's say there's a wall that you want to fill, you know that the vertical is going to be stronger, so you are going to cut those back more each year. But you could maybe also, what I said about bending them round, is that having them upwards and then bending them round means that you actually are sort of forcing the tree to become less and you're forcing that branch to become less vigorous. So here is an example of a fan that's actually started to grow secondary branches on its own. I think this might be a full staff. Full staff branches quite readily in the first year anyway of growth. So down here, you probably at some stage remove all of these. This is just an example of what to do. Pretend this is a fan that you've actually pruned back into the second year after you've bought it. You probably want to remove these lower ones. Again, you want to show off that Y-shaped area. You could keep this now. This is growing horizontally, which is quite nice. This branch is coming out at a slight angle towards me, but you could easily just bend that upwards. It's not going to be too obvious. This one behind it, again, is actually growing at the way angle. It's so close to this branch that you may get rid of it. You probably want to get rid of that because it's going to clutter it up. Now, I said slightly earlier before, you don't want to keep every single one of these branches at every single node, because it will get too messy. The idea of creating a formal trained tree is that it isn't messy. It's a very sort of, it's a work of art. It's not a messy looking sort of natural tree. Initially, like I said, a couple insurance policies with the when I was training the espaliers, it doesn't hurt to just basically keep both of these, let's say, as the verticals, and then you decide as the tree gets slightly older which one of those you want to keep. If at the first stage obviously at the first stage, if you cut every other one of these off, you get more growth on these, the ones that are remaining. However, as I said before, vertical growth, you're not worried about how much growth. You're going to get loads of growth anyway on these, and the insurance factor, even if you allow it just one season, just gives you that flexibility. You may also find that I don't know, the left grows more than the right, so you want to match them up. You may find that the left one, for whatever reason, some of these vertical and horizontal branches look good, but on the right they're not as good. But you just want to be able to match things up, so the more you've got going on in the first year, the better. This is after you've planted the tree, and then after that you can sort of decide, okay, I'm going to get rid of half of these and half of those, and gradually you create the shape. Obviously, initially have a target in mind with fan training, because of the fact, as I said, there's more sort of artistic license with a fan trained tree. You can sort of do more with it, have an idea, but at the same time you're just gonna have to see what the tree does as well and sort of compromise between the two, because I've never actually fully bothered to go through with a very, very formal looking fan, because each year you have to prune it back to that shape. That's something that some meticulous gardener may want to do, but I've got too many things going on that I'm not that bothered. I've got several fan trained trees that are mature, but they're what I call informal fan trained trees, where effectively it's just the initial fan shape, and then it's just a big wall of branches and stuff, and it has an impact, but it's not as beautiful as, let's say, something that's growing in Versailles. But with an espalier, it's always very formal, because all you're doing is creating tiers, and then you create a next tier, and it's a very rigid shape. So I'm going to go back up in a sec to the first fans and just, the older espalier trees, and show you how to maintain an older espalier. So we're back at the more mature espaliers, and I'm just going to show you what to do as the sort of annual maintenance for a large espalier tree. So having done a lot of hard work ensuring that the lower tiers are all good and healthy, you can see that the amount of growth on the lower tier on this north facing wall espalier is equivalent to the branches above. So you can tell from the thickness of the laterals that they're all relatively similar, and that hasn't happened by chance. What I've said before is you establish the lowest tier, make sure it is healthy. You may spend 2 years establishing the lowest tier if for whatever reason you don't think it's very healthy, before you go on to the next one. And all you do is you keep cutting the leader back. You can see how much stronger the leader wood is compared to the laterals, and that's just because the tree wants to just grow upwards and upwards and upwards, and it has been programmed to do this. It's a bit of not too happy there, but it is programmed to go upwards. So basically you have to establish these lower tiers, and the problem being that if you were on your third tier and your lowest tier is very weak, that lowest tier is going to continue to be weak, and the top will just get stronger, and eventually you may lose that. Now, I've taken a lot of time to make sure that all of these espaliers, although they do need a bit of a prune, as in cutting off the new growth, all the lowest tiers are looking quite healthy. Now, the arms can elongate to about sort of 2 meters or so. I suppose you could maybe get a bit longer, but 2 meters is fine. I don't know why you'd want to sort of extend them anymore, but they can look quite nice where they sort of marry up against each other. And so it depends what sort of what you want to do with the, let's say, a wall that you're having espaliers on. You can have freestanding espaliers in that you've created a fence, and the espaliers become the fence. That's also something nice to do. But yeah, I mean, it's whatever effect you want to create. You could effectively create rooms within a garden. Now, maintaining these is is a matter of just pruning each year. Once you've got to this stage, you can see there's much more growth at the top of the tree. There's more light at the tree as well, with this being north facing wall. So loads and loads of branches that I need to go up on a ladder at some stage. So this only being July, you've got all this new growth. Now this is good scion wood, as it were, for chip budding later. But being an espalier, sometimes you want to show off the shape of the tree. Some of these branches are doing the right thing in that they're not actually producing a lot of new growth, they're just producing fruit of spurs, which is wonderful to look at. Some of these varieties, this is, what's this? This might be Herefordshire Russet, producing loads and loads of growth, so it looks a bit messy. You can come along, let's say if you wanted to show off the fact that you've created an espalier, you could come along and just cut these off to third downward facing buds. Halfway through the season, you could do that now. They would grow again, but you could do that 2-3 times a year. Just clip it back like a hedge, as it were. It's not going to affect the tree too much, as long as it's still got lots of leaves on it, so that you are still able to show off the shape of the tree. As you cut these to third downward facing buds, you eventually will come to produce these spurs. You can see here, this initial branch was growing out. This must be about at least 5 years old now. That was cut to a third downward facing bud, so there's one bud there, two bud, three. The first one didn't grow, the other two did, so they grew out. I cut those back as well, maybe to there, which somehow is the third downward facing bud, I guess. I mean, you basically want to create short spurs. You can see there's a joint there, there's that, and then this one is now just a fruit spur, which is great. Again, here that's a bit longer, maybe I left a bit too much on there, but off there more branches, and you get all these short little intersections, so you can tell how old this is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that. So basically that's what I'm doing. That's what I mean by producing spurs. Again, this one's quite easy to see. One bit of growth there, so there's 1, 2, 3 buds, and then here there's another one, so it'll be I don't know where the other two are, but there's 1, 2, well, 1, 2 here again. So this one's quite vertical, so it doesn't actually look quite as nice. You want it to sort of crisscross a bit. This one, you can see one bit of growth, 1 year's growth there, so you get 2 of the buds. A second year's growth there, it's just that bit, and then you get both of these. So you can see what I mean. You're just cutting back to short bits. You could then come along and cut those off. Now, as those get longer, as I said, they start to eat away at the gap between the tiers, which looks good, and you can see not much growth comes downwards, because trees naturally don't want to produce downward facing branches, so then they're not actually sort of crossing over each other. So you could just have this where it just goes upwards, but if instead of 50 centimeters apart, the gap here was, let's say, 30 centimeters apart, they would overlap, which wouldn't look as good, because you'd like to see the sort of brickwork through them. So that's more or less all I've got to say about espaliers right now. I could waffle on for hours. If you have loads and loads of questions, I'd be happy to answer. Answer anything. I have been producing espaliers for a long time. It is something I am very passionate about. I'm sorry I'm not doing them. I'm not producing the 2-year espaliers and the stepovers and the palmates and the double Eucordons and candelabras anymore in the nursery. What we're essentially doing is, where I've had to downsize my time, because producing espaliers is quite a time-consuming thing, although customers do like them where people's gardens are getting smaller and or just more interest in the formal looking trees. I feel it's something that people should learn to actually do themselves, because as I said before, even if you buy a 2-tier espalier from me and you spend 70 quid or whatever on one of those, and you receive this big thing and you're like, wow, great, instant impact on the tree. I like buying things that are already built as well, but the thing is, you actually have to learn, just like if you were buying a maiden, you actually have to learn how to train that tree, and it is an extremely nice thing to learn to do. It's a bit like learning to graft. It's a bit like learning to learn to do anything really, but it's the same principle as if you were doing any other training on a tree. You cut the leader back. The consequence being that the result of that is that the tree will now start branching from just below where you've cut. Now you can use some of those branches to, if you were to create a goblet shaped tree, so you could create the crown of a sort of freestanding tree, or you could, if you've got a nice framework in, which is extremely important. So this one behind me is on vine eyes and wires. Once you've got that framework in, as long as you've made the cut at the right time of the year, as I said, at the right height, you can use several branches to create a sort of cross shape, which will be for your espalier, or a Y shape for your fan. And that's about it. Now the biggest things from there is maintaining the tree, so keep an eye on it every few months. You want to continue to tie them in, because like I showed you with the one that snapped, once it goes beyond the right angle and it gets too thick, now you can't really bend in second year wood, so it's got to be new wood. Now is a good time where the wood is nice and supple, as long as the joint isn't too sort of, as long as you're not bending that joint bit which has become stiff. Some varieties like Bramley seedling, the wood is extremely thick and stiff even when it's very short, so that one you have to keep an eye on. You actually have to do sort of almost weekly. But most varieties in the sort of related to cocks are quite easy to do. Now, as long as you're doing that, as long as you bend them in, have an insurance policy one as well in, one or two branches in there that they're just there just in case anything should go wrong, which it does. And don't beat yourself up about it. If it does, all you have to do, if things go wrong, cut the leader back and grow a new leader. Growing a new leader is the easiest thing in the world, as long as you leave a few buds. The tree naturally does that and starts again and really establish that tier. But like I said, it's something that you should learn to do even if you were to buy a 2-tier espalier. So I feel like you might as well just buy a 1-tier espalier. It's going to be a more balanced tree. It should establish slightly better. And you can then learn how to train your own espaliers. And you could do, let's say, instead of just sticking at 2 and thinking job's done, you could be ambitious, go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know how big your wall is or whatever, but you, or your fence, if you don't like your neighbors, whack up a sort of 5-tier espalier, and it's a lovely thing to have. You could then even graft different varieties onto different tiers if you wanted to. That's not going to be too difficult to do, but yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with an espalier. Likewise with fans, you can as well. I prefer espaliers to fans, but yeah, hopefully the video has shown you fundamentally what to do. Variety choice is a huge thing as well. Like I said before, if you can pick something like Tideman's Late Orange, Laxton Superb, Red Falstaff, those are going to be extremely easy varieties to train as an espalier. If you wanted to go with like Red Windsor or Egremont Russet or, I don't know, Bramley, they're going to be much trickier to do. So have a think about that. You may want to sort of go with an easier option, because if it's your first time, it's going to be harder to do. We also do the pairs still, the pair espaliers and fans. Now pairs are trickier to do. I probably should have included some in this video, but I didn't. Apologies. Pairs, the only thing is you will get less branches. So where you cut the leader off at 50 centimeters, instead of getting sort of some of those trees I showed you down there, you had about 6 or 7 different branches coming off. You will generally, with pairs, you will get sort of 3, maybe 4, sometimes only 2, and that's quite frustrating, where you're going to either have to opt for notching, or you're going to have to basically cut the leader off again to get the more branching. That can be sort of remedied by picking a variety like, let's say, Doyen de Comis or Durondo, which will branch more. I think Williams will also branch more, but Conference can be a bit iffy. Concord can be extremely annoying to use, so don't use Concord, I would say. But with pairs also, the wood is more brittle, which is a big problem for someone like me who's trying to sort of produce these to send them out, because branches aren't going to be as strong and basically hardy when it comes to posting them out, or untying the branches and leaving them alone and then coming back and something snapped in the wind. But it just means that you have to be on it a bit more, because you can't then come along and bend the branches as much. So you just have to be there during the summer. You can't go on holiday for 2 months and come back in sort of September and think, oh, I'm going to bend this in, because it might not work. You can remedy that by using a lower branch rather than one that's right at the sort of, you don't want to create a 90-degree angle. You might want to create an initial sort of 60-degree angle and bend that in. That will be fine. That's something I've learned over the years to do with them. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this video isn't too sort of, well, it's not corrupted by all this wind that we're having right now. It's not too windy. I'll probably make more espalier videos years to come if people have got questions, and I might sort of use more sort of, I don't know, just better videoing, editing skills. I can't really be bothered to edit. I haven't got time, I'm afraid. So anyway, that's the best I can do right now.